homosexuality is a part of nature, then God created it. We don't know why God did what God did. And I think anybody who thinks they know why God does anything or what God does and doesn't do is simply being arrogant. We can't know. So all we have is the evidence of the world around us. And I think the evidence is pretty clear that whatever causes homosexuality, it is a natural phenomenon. So people say, well, the Bible is against it. The fact is the Bible doesn't address it. The sin of Sodom, which should resonate very nicely with Occupy, and this is referred to explicitly in the book of Ezekiel, the sin of Sodom had nothing to do with sex. Nothing. The threat of homosexual gang rape is not about being homosexual. It was a threat of violence. The sin of Sodom was hostility to the poor and the stranger. And Jewish tradition really unwraps this. It describes a city-state really, where if a stranger came into town, it was punishable by death to bring them under your roof, which is, by the way, the exact opposite of culture in the Middle East. And Lot brought these two strangers under his roof, and that's what was going on. The two verses that occur in Leviticus that refer to a man lying down with a man, like a man lies down with a woman, it's pretty unclear exactly what that means. And here I'm talking in terms of Jewish law. There's nothing else, absolutely nothing else in the Jewish scriptures. There are a few explicit references in Paul's epistles, but being Jewish, those aren't authoritative for me. And being interested in history, I have to wonder whether those things were actually interpolated later. But I don't want to freak out believing Christians too much, but that's a fact. The scriptures, Quran too, were all influenced by history and politics and other things before they were put in their present forms. That's pretty clear to anybody who is a serious biblical or Quranic scholar. What the verses may refer to is a particular act, perhaps anal intercourse. That's how most gay Jews who are knowledgeable would talk about it. And I remember one guy who was an Orthodox rabbi from a very conservative Israeli yeshiva, Shlomo Alexandria is his name. He came out as gay, but we won't talk about where he went to school. That's his deal with them. And he said, so of the 613 commandments a Jew is supposed to observe, I observe 611. He doesn't observe being fruitful and multiply, and he doesn't observe whatever those things mean. The Bible is silent. I know the Jewish tradition is silent about it until the Middle Ages. There's like maybe one or two oblique references. But the idea of homosexuality as a state of being for a human being is modern. You don't find references to it in ancient literature. We find references to homosexual acts, and some of that may be somewhat shocking. The Isle of Lesbos, from which the word lesbian comes, which is the poetess Sappho, who probably was a lesbian. We have all the accounts of Greek master teachers and students having sexual relations as part of their bonding, and we have, and this is probably the most misunderstood of all, we have the hoplites. Now, I've heard people argue about, that homosexuality will bring down civilization because look what happened to the Greeks, and it was all because Greek soldiers had boys to have sex with, and they were called hoplites. Well, let me tell you what a hoplite actually was. And if you ever see a movie or even see a trailer for the movie 300, Those are hoplites.
Right.
Those guys, the 182nd Airborne Division of the ancient Greek army, those were hoplites. And Herodotus reports that as a kind of bonding for esprit de corps, they engaged in sexual activities. That's it. It's, you know, there just isn't that much. And here we're looking at a question about homosexual marriage. Now, we have reached an age when most people, and that includes the majority of Americans, understand that homosexuality is a reality and not a choice, and that there is a problem. I've long since myself signed up to perform wedding ceremonies between people of the same gender. I've never been asked. I was at first, when I first signed up, a little uncomfortable about calling it marriage. I said, well, I'll call it commitment, which is what marriage is. Marriage, what is marriage? Marriage is a contract between a man and a woman. It's okay. Contract between a man and a woman. And in every civilization in the world, it is at base about property. In the Talmud tradition I know the best, the tractates of the Talmud that deal with marriage all deal with property and property rights. They deal also with some other rights. By the way, women generally come out ahead on those things. The idea of civil marriage is modern. And by the way, religious marriage didn't even occur in the church for long periods of time. People got married, they registered with the king or the local aristocracy, or they just went and lived together, and there would be a ceremony of their commitment. The history of this thing is such that we need to understand that religious marriage is not universal through the whole history of the church. Among Jews and Muslims, it is a contract. We don't use vows and oaths. It's a contract, a written contract, and it's legally enforceable. It's been tested in courts, and it's what the Muslims have as well. So it's a contract, and you would not have in Jewish law same-sex marriage. It's just not there. If you talk about civil marriage is really modern. It didn't exist before the American and French revolutions. The idea of the government being the one who would register marriages and be in charge of marriages is modern, only the last 2 centuries and a little more. When I was a rabbi in Curacao, which is a Dutch possession, when I did a wedding, there was first a informal private ceremony with a judge that was essentially, you know, a legal ceremony. When I went to do my wedding ceremony, it was purely a religious ceremony. When I announced, I now pronounce you husband and wife, I was able to say it according to the laws of Moses and Israel. When I've performed marriages here in North Carolina, I have to say, I declare you husband and wife under the laws of Moses and Israel and North Carolina. And I see no reason why I am an official of the state of North Carolina. So people are confusing civil marriage, which is really the law of the land, with a religious institution. And by the way, different religions, it's different. In Christianity, particularly Catholicism, you know, High Church, Lutheranism, Episcopalianism, it's a sacrament. It's something done by the church under the authority of the church. In Judaism and in Islam, it is something that the husband, the bride and the groom, actions that they take And you don't even need a rabbi. You need two witnesses, just like for a contract. So there's a lot of confusion about that. Now, the wall of separation is something that is, history is being rewritten in a rather Orwellian way. I'm not going to go into that, it would take too long. But the role of religion in society, in a free society, is to speak truth to power. This is something I've been involved in doing for over 50 years. I started out handing out ban the bomb leaflets when I was 14 years old. Ike was still president. Religion has had a role in speaking truth to power since colonial times. And by this I mean anti-war movements, civil rights movements of all kinds. It goes all the way back to the 1600s. I've studied that history. You won't find it in most standard histories, any of it, except for the suffragettes and the emancipation movement, the anti-slavery. I also, in thinking about it for this particular presentation, came to realize, where was another category of law that banned people from marrying because who they were born as? And there's a very clear example, and that's the Anti-Miscegenation Laws. I looked up, there's websites where you can find all the anti-miscegenation laws state by state. I looked up North Carolina. North Carolina passed its first anti-miscegenation law in 1715. And it remained in force. In 1953, a statute defined marriage between white and Negroes or Indians void, and the penalty was for that of an infamous crime and meant 4 months to 10 years imprisonment and a fine at the discretion of the court. That lasted until 1967, when the Supreme Court repealed all anti-miscegenation laws in the United States. Until then, states like Arizona had them, California had them, all sorts of states had them. This is a civil rights issue. It's not a religious issue. And I would say to those people who are promoting this, most of them talk about they want limited government. And I say to them, start by keeping the government out of our bedrooms.